The dust-choked streets of Pinos Altos, New Mexico Territory, 1870, held no mercy for those without means. A truth Josephine Owens discovered when her father's debts became her inheritance. The auctioneer's voice boomed across the town square as she stood trembling on the wooden platform, her chestnut hair whipping across her face in the autumn wind, hiding the tears that threatened to fall. $500 for the lady. Do I hear 6? The portly auctioneer circled her like a vulture. Remember, gentlemen, she comes with the deed to the Owens homestead, 10 acres of prime land just waiting for the right man to work it. Josephine's fingers curled into fists beneath the threadbare shawl draped around her shoulders. 3 weeks ago, she'd been nursing her dying father through his final days. Now she stood on an auction block, her very personhood reduced to a commodity after the bank seized everything following his passing. The crowd of men gathered in the dusty square shifted restlessly. Most were miners, their faces permanently etched with grime, or cattle barons from the surrounding territory looking to expand their holdings through the oldest form of acquisition, marriage by necessity. 600, called a gruff voice from the back. Josie recognized Theodore Blackburn, owner of the territory's largest silver mine, and a man known for treating his workers little better than the mules that hauled his ore. 700. This from Edgar Winters, a neighboring rancher whose 3 previous wives had all died under mysterious circumstances. The bidding continued, her price rising with each call, her spirit sinking with each sum. This was legal, her father's debts transferred to her, and as a woman alone in the territory without family, the courts had determined this the most humane solution to her predicament. $1,000. Blackburn's voice rang out, silencing the crowd. Even the auctioneer seemed impressed, his eyebrows disappearing beneath the brim of his bowler hat. $1,000, he repeated, savoring each syllable. Going once. Josephine's eyes darted frantically around the square, searching for a sympathetic face, any face that might offer an alternative to being sold to the highest bidder like a prized heifer. Going twice. I refuse. Her voice started soft but gained strength as she stepped back from the auctioneer's grasp. I refuse to be sold to the highest bidder or any bidder at all. The crowd fell silent, then erupted in murmurs. The auctioneer's face purpled with rage. Now see here, Miss Owens. The court has ordered. I don't give a damn what the court ordered. Josephine's voice carried across the square, stronger than she felt. I am not property to be auctioned. You'll go to jail then, the auctioneer threatened, grabbing for her arm. Debtor's prison until you work off what you owe. From the edge of the crowd, a tall figure stepped forward. His face was partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but Josephine could see the sharp line of his jaw covered in several days' worth of stubble. He wore a dusty duster that had seen better days, but his posture was straight as a rail spike. The lady said no. His voice was quiet but carried a weight that made even the auctioneer pause. This ain't your business, cowboy, the auctioneer spat. The auction is legal and binding. Adam Daniels, the stranger introduced himself with a tip of his hat. Recently of the Texas Rangers, currently of nowhere in particular. He placed a hand casually on his holstered Colt. And I believe a woman has the right to choose her own path, legal papers or no. Blackburn pushed his way to the front of the crowd. I bid fair and square. The woman and the land are mine by rights. Adam's eyes never left Josephine's as he extended his hand toward her. Miss, if you refuse to be sold to the highest bidder, then come with me for free. The square erupted into chaos. The sheriff stepped forward, hand on his gun belt, while Blackburn bellowed about his rights. But Josephine heard none of it. In that moment, she saw something in the stranger's eyes that had become foreign to her respect. Without hesitation, she took his outstretched hand and stepped down from the auction block. "This is unlawful interference." The auctioneer was practically foaming at the mouth. "Sheriff, arrest them both." The sheriff, a man named Parker who had known Josephine's father, looked conflicted. "The papers are legal, Miss Owens." "Then I'll pay her debts," Adam said calmly. "How much?" The sheriff consulted a ledger. $873. A murmur ran through the crowd. That was a fortune, far more than most men saw in years. Without blinking, Adam reached into his coat and pulled out a leather pouch. He counted out gold pieces until the sheriff nodded, satisfied. "Where did you?" Josephine began, but Adam silenced her with a gentle shake of his head. "Later," he whispered, then addressed the crowd. "The lady's debts are paid. She's free to go wherever she pleases." "And she pleases to go with you, I suppose?" Blackburn sneered, his face twisted with anger at being denied his prize. Josephine lifted her chin. "I go where I choose, Mr. Blackburn, and it isn't with you." Adam offered his arm, which she took, and they walked through the parting crowd. Josephine could feel the eyes burning into her back, especially Blackburn's. She knew this wasn't over. Men like him didn't take rejection well. But for the first time since her father's death, she felt a flicker of hope. They reached the hitching post where a magnificent buckskin horse waited patiently. "Can you ride?" Adam asked, untying the reins. "Since I was 6, Josephine answered, wondering what kind of man paid a stranger's debts without question. "Good." He helped her into the saddle, then swung up behind her. "Because we need to put some distance between us and that crowd before Blackburn decides his pride is worth more than his good sense." As they rode out of Pino's Altos, Josephine realized she just entrusted her life to a complete stranger, a man who might be no better than those she'd left behind. Yet something told her Adam Daniels was different. Whether that instinct was right would determine her future. The sun was beginning to set when they finally slowed their pace. They had ridden hard, following game trails and stream beds to make tracking difficult. Adam had remained silent for most of the journey, occasionally checking behind them or adjusting their course. "There's a line shack about a mile ahead," he finally said. "We can rest there for the night." Josephine nodded, too exhausted and overwhelmed to speak. Her entire life had been upended in a matter of hours, and the reality of her situation was beginning to sink in. She'd fled with a stranger, leaving behind everything she'd ever known. The line shack was little more than 4 walls and a roof, but it was solid and dry. Adam dismounted first, then helped her down, his hands strong and steady at her waist. "Thank you," she said, looking up at him properly for the first time. His eyes were a striking blue, crinkled at the corners from years in the sun. A thin scar ran along his left cheekbone, and his dark blonde hair curled slightly where it peeked out from beneath his hat. "Don't thank me yet," he replied, leading the buckskin to a lean-to shelter beside the shack. "We're not out of this mess." Inside, the shack was sparse but clean. A small iron stove stood in one corner, a narrow cot against the wall, and a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs completed the furnishings. Adam busied himself lighting the stove and unpacking provisions from his saddlebags: beans, coffee, jerky, and surprisingly, a small loaf of bread that looked fresh. "You planned this," Josephine observed, watching him work. "The gold, the provisions. You knew you would help someone today." Adam paused, his back to her. "Not you specifically, no, but I heard about the auction in Socorro last week. Figured I should be there." "Why?" He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "Because it isn't right. No person should be sold like cattle, debts or no debts." "That's a progressive view for these parts. I've seen enough of the world to know cruelty when I see it." He poured water from his canteen into a small pot and set it on the stove. "You hungry?" Josephine nodded, suddenly aware she hadn't eaten since morning. As Adam prepared a simple meal, she found herself studying him, trying to reconcile his actions with her experience of men, which had taught her to be wary of unexpected kindness. "Where did you get so much gold?" she asked finally, accepting the tin cup of coffee he offered. "That's a long story." "We seem to have time." Adam settled into the chair across from her. "I was with the Rangers for 6 years. Last year, my partner and I tracked a gang that had been robbing stage coaches near El Paso. We caught up with them in a canyon south of there." He paused, his eyes focused somewhere far away. "Things went bad. My partner, James, was killed. I got 3 of the gang, but their leader escaped with a bullet in his shoulder." He sipped his coffee before continuing. "I tracked him for 2 months across 3 territories. When I finally caught up to him, he had the loot stashed in a cave, nearly $20,000 in gold and banknotes. I returned what I could to the rightful owners, but most was untraceable." "So you kept it?" Josephine asked, surprised. "Turned most of it in." Adam's eyes met hers. "But the ranger captain suggested some might have been lost in the struggle, said I'd earned a finder's fee." "And that's what you used today?" Adam nodded. "Seemed fitting, using stolen money to prevent another theft." Josephine felt a lump form in her throat. "I don't know how to thank you." "Don't need thanks, but I do need to know what you want to do next." His gaze was direct, honest. "I can take you to Santa Fe, help you find work or passage east if that's what you want, or I can help you fight for your land, though that won't be easy." "You do that. Help me fight." "I've got nothing pressing on my calendar," he said with the ghost of a smile. "And I admit I've developed a certain distaste for men like Blackburn." Josephine considered her options. Going east meant starting over completely, something that both terrified and tempted her. Fighting meant facing Blackburn and the others, with slim chances of success. But it also meant standing up for what was rightfully hers. "My father built that homestead from nothing," she said finally. "He's buried there along with my mother and brother. I can't just leave it." Adam nodded as if he'd expected this answer. "Then we fight. But not tonight. Tonight you rest." He insisted she take the cot while he slept on the floor near the door. As Josephine lay awake, listening to the steady rhythm of Adam's breathing, she wondered what she had done to deserve this stranger's help. And more troublingly, why her heart quickened whenever he looked at her with those steady blue eyes. Morning brought clarity and caution. As they shared a breakfast of leftover bread and coffee, Josephine voiced her concerns. "Mr. Daniels, Adam," he corrected gently. "Adam, then. I'm grateful beyond words for what you did yesterday, but I need to understand what happens now. What do you want from me?" His eyes widened slightly, then softened with understanding. "Nothing you're not willing to give, Miss Owens. I meant what I said. I'll help you fight for your land, and when that's done, I'll be on my way if that's what you want." Just like that. "You'd risk your life for a stranger and ask nothing in return." Adam set down his cup. "When my partner died, I spent a year tracking down his killer, not because I was ordered to, but because it was right. This feels right too." He paused. "But if it makes you uncomfortable, I understand. I can take you to Santa Fe today, help you get situated, and be on my way." Josephine studied him, searching for any hint of deception. Finding none, she made her decision. "No, I want to go home to my home, and I would welcome your help in keeping it." Adam nodded, relief evident in his expression. "Then that's what we'll do." They set out after breakfast, taking a circuitous route to avoid detection. Adam explained that Blackburn would likely have men watching the main trails to the Owens homestead. "Tell me about your place," he said as they rode side by side now, having acquired a second horse from a rancher Adam knew. "It's not much compared to Blackburn's spread, but it's good land. 10 acres of pasture with Cottonwood Creek running through it." A sturdy cabin my father built with his own hands, some chickens, a milk cow, 2 workhorses. She smiled at the memory. And the finest vegetable garden in the county, according to the Harvest Festival judges. Sounds like something worth fighting for. It was before. She hesitated. Before the fever took my mother and brother 5 years ago. After that, Pa seemed to lose his will, started drinking, neglecting the place, borrowed money from the bank that he never had a hope of repaying. And that's how Blackburn got involved, Josephine nodded. He's on the bank board. Been trying to get our land for years. It adjoins his mine property and has the best water access for miles. When Pa died, Blackburn made sure the bank called in the loans immediately. And the auction was his way of getting both the land and you. Yes, she shuddered at the memory. They rode in silence for a while, each lost in thought. By mid-afternoon, they approached the homestead from the north, keeping to the tree line for cover. Adam dismounted and helped Josephine down. "We'll leave the horses here and go the rest of the way on foot," he said. "Need to make sure no one's waiting for us." Josephine led the way through the woods she knew so well, pointing out game trails and landmarks. When they reached the edge of the clearing where the cabin stood, Adam put a hand on her arm to stop her. "Wait here," he whispered, drawing his pistol. "It's my home," she protested. "And if there's trouble, I need to know you're safe." His expression softened. "Please, Josephine." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and something in his voice made her acquiesce. She watched as he moved silently across the open ground, hugging the shadows, his movements revealing his years of training. The cabin appeared deserted, but Adam approached cautiously, checking the barn and outbuildings before signaling for her to join him. "It's clear," he said as she reached him. "But someone's been here. Recently." Josephine pushed past him into the cabin and stopped short. The place had been ransacked, furniture overturned, her mother's china smashed, and her father's desk hacked apart with what must have been an axe. "Blackburn," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. Adam's hand came to rest gently on her shoulder. "I'm sorry." She wiped away her tears and straightened her spine. "It's just things. They can be repaired or replaced." But her voice trembled as she knelt to pick up a shattered frame containing a daguerreotype of her family, the only image she had of her mother and brother. Adam moved to the broken window, scanning the property. "We should expect company. Blackburn will have someone watching the place." "What do we do? First, we secure what we can, then we figure out our next move." He holstered his pistol. "Do you have any weapons?" Pa's shotgun and rifle should be in the cabinet if they haven't been stolen. The weapons were indeed still there, along with a box of ammunition. Adam checked them both and handed the shotgun to Josephine. "You know how to use this?" "Since I was 12, she replied, checking the action with practiced hands. Adam's eyebrows rose appreciatively. "Good. We'll need to take turns keeping watch tonight." They spent the remaining daylight hours cleaning up what they could and securing the cabin. Adam repaired the broken window with boards from the woodpile and reinforced the door. Josephine salvaged what food remained in the root cellar and prepared a simple stew. As night fell, they sat at the newly righted table, eating by lamplight and discussing their options. "The legal route will be slow," Adam said. "We'd need to petition the territorial court, prove your father's debts were improperly called or that the auction was illegally conducted. And in the meantime, we hold what's yours. Possession counts for a lot out here." Josephine nodded, though the prospect of an extended siege was daunting. "How long will you stay?" Adam met her gaze steadily. "As long as it takes." The sincerity in his voice warmed her more than the stew. "Why, Adam? Why are you doing all this for me?" He was silent for a long moment, staring into his bowl as if the answer might be found there. "When I was 15, my mother fell ill." My father had left years before, so it was just the two of us. We lived in a small town outside Austin. The local doctor refused to treat her because we couldn't pay his fee up front. His jaw tightened at the memory. She died 3 days later. That night, I broke into the doctor's home and held a gun to his head, demanding he give me back my mother. Josephine reached across the table and placed her hand on his. What happened? The sheriff found me there, crying like a child with the gun still in my hand. But instead of arresting me, he took me home with him, raised me alongside his own son. Adam looked up, his eyes meeting hers. He taught me that helping others isn't just a duty, it's what makes us human. He sounds like a good man, the best I've known. He's the one who sponsored me for the Rangers. A ghost of a smile crossed Adam's face. He'd approve of what I'm doing now. Josephine squeezed his hand. I think he would be proud. Their eyes held for a long moment before Adam cleared his throat and stood. I'll take first watch. Try to get some sleep. Josephine nodded, suddenly aware of how intimate their conversation had become. As she prepared for bed in her old room, she found herself wondering what life might be like with a man like Adam Daniels, a man who valued justice and compassion above all else. The night passed without incident, but dawn brought unwelcome visitors. Adam, who had been watching from the bedroom window after they switched posts at midnight, gently shook Josephine awake. "Riders coming," he whispered. "5 of them." Josephine was instantly alert, reaching for the shotgun propped beside the bed. "Blackburn's men, most likely. Get dressed and meet me in the main room." By the time she joined him, the riders were approaching the cabin. Adam had positioned himself by the front window, his rifle ready but out of sight. "Stay back from the windows," he instructed. "Let me do the talking for now." The men reined in about 30 yards from the cabin. Josephine recognized Blackburn's foreman, Harris, a brutal man with a reputation for handling problems that required more fists than words. "Come out, Daniels," Harris called. "We know you're in there with the Owens woman." Adam exchanged a look with Josephine before responding. "State your business, Harris. Mr. Blackburn wants his property. The woman and the land are legally his. The debt's been paid in full. There's no claim on either." Harris spat on the ground. "That ain't how Mr. Blackburn sees it. He says the auction was complete when you interfered." "Sheriff's backing him on this." Josephine felt her heart sink. Sheriff Parker had seemed reluctant at the auction, but if Blackburn had pressured him. "We're not looking for trouble," Adam called back. "But we're not leaving either. Miss Owens has the right to her family's land." "You got till sundown to clear out," Harris responded. "After that, we ain't responsible for what happens." With that, the men wheeled their horses around and galloped away, leaving a cloud of dust in their wake. Adam turned to Josephine, his expression grim. "Well, we know where we stand." "We can't hold off 5 armed men indefinitely," she said, voicing what they both knew. "No, but we can make it costly enough that Blackburn might reconsider." Adam checked his ammunition. "And we need to get word to someone who can help, a U.S. Marshal or a judge not in Blackburn's pocket." "Socorro is the nearest place with a federal office," Josephine said. "It's a day's ride." Adam nodded. "One of us needs to go." "I'll go," she volunteered. "You're better in a fight if they come back before I return. It's too dangerous for you to travel alone right now." "Blackburn's men will be watching the trails. And they'll be expecting us to stay put, not for me to leave," Josephine countered. "Besides, I know these hills better than anyone. There are old Apache trails that Blackburn's men wouldn't know about." Adam considered this, clearly torn between the need for outside help and his desire to keep her safe. "The Apache trails, can you really navigate them? My brother's best friend was a half-Apache boy named Thomas. He showed us every hidden path in these mountains before he left to join his mother's people." She met Adam's concerned gaze steadily. "I can make it, Adam." After a long moment he nodded. "All right, but you leave at dusk, not before. And if there's any sign of trouble on the trail, you turn back immediately." The rest of the day was spent preparing. Adam checked and rechecked their defenses, while Josephine gathered supplies for her journey and plotted her route. They spoke little, each acutely aware of the dangers that lay ahead and the slim odds of success. As the sun began to set, Adam helped Josephine saddle her horse, securing her provisions and making sure she had enough ammunition for her father's pistol, which she would carry concealed in her coat. "Remember," he said as he handed her the reins, "find Marshal Everett. He worked with the Rangers occasionally. He'll listen to you when you mention my name." Josephine nodded, her throat tight with emotion. The thought of leaving Adam alone to face Blackburn's men filled her with dread, yet she knew this was their best chance. "Be careful," she whispered. "Don't try to be a hero." That advice goes both ways. His hand lingered on hers where it gripped the reins. "I'll be here when you return." Something in his voice, a note of uncertainty, perhaps made her hesitate. On impulse, she leaned down from the saddle and pressed her lips to his cheek. "That's a promise you'd better keep, Adam Daniels." Before he could respond, she urged her horse forward, disappearing into the gathering dusk. Adam watched until she was swallowed by the shadows of the pines, then turned back to the cabin to prepare for what promised to be a long night. Josephine rode hard, following the faint trail that only those who knew where to look could discern. The moon was nearly full, providing enough light to navigate but also increasing the risk of being spotted. Every sound in the darkness set her nerves on edge: the call of an owl, the rustle of wind through the pines, the occasional crack of a branch beneath her horse's hooves. She had been riding for nearly 2 hours when she heard it, the unmistakable sound of horses approaching from the north. Quickly, she guided her mount off the trail and into a dense thicket, her heart pounding as she waited. 3 riders passed within 20 yards of her hiding place. Even in the moonlight, she recognized 2 of them as Blackburn's men. They were heading toward the homestead, and they were armed with more than just pistols. One carried what appeared to be a rifle with a telescopic sight. Fear clutched at her heart. Adam had been expecting men at dawn, not in the middle of the night, and a sharpshooter changed everything. She had to warn him, but if she turned back now, they would never get help in time. The riders had a head start and would reach the cabin long before she could return. Her only hope was to continue to Socorro and pray that Adam's experience would keep him alive until she returned with reinforcements. With tears streaming down her face, Josephine urged her horse forward, away from home and the man who had risked everything to help her. Adam knew something was wrong the moment he heard the dogs barking in the distance. Blackburn's hunting hounds used for tracking runaway workers as often as for hunting game. He extinguished the lamp and moved silently to the window, scanning the moonlit property for signs of movement. There, at the edge of the tree line, 3 figures moving with purpose toward the cabin. One broke away from the others, circling toward the back of the property, while the other 2 approached more directly. Adam assessed his options quickly. The cabin was defensible but not impregnable. If they had enough men, or if they were willing to set fire to the place, his position would quickly become untenable. He needed to change the terms of engagement. Silently, he gathered his rifle, pistol, and a small pack of provisions. Then, moving with the stealth that had served him well as a ranger, he slipped out the back door and into the shadows. Let them come to an empty cabin. Let them waste their time searching while he became the hunter rather than the hunted. The 2 men approaching the front of the cabin were careless, confident in their superior numbers. Adam recognized Harris and another of Blackburn's thugs, a man named Riker with a reputation for cruelty. They were armed with shotguns devastating at close range but less effective at a distance. The third man was more worrying. He had taken up position on a rise about 100 yards from the cabin, setting up what Adam could now see was indeed a sharpshooter's rifle. That changed things significantly. Adam circled through the trees until he was behind the sharpshooter. The man was focused on the cabin, peering through his scope, waiting for any movement inside. He never heard Adam approach until the cold barrel of a Colt pressed against the back of his neck. "Easy now," Adam whispered. "Set the rifle down slow and you might live through the night." The man froze, then carefully laid the rifle on the ground. Smart choice. Adam struck quickly with the butt of his pistol, rendering the man unconscious. He bound the sharpshooter's hands and feet with the man's own belt and bandana, then turned his attention to the other two. Harris and Riker had reached the cabin and were now attempting to force the door. Adam watched as they finally broke through, disappearing inside. Moments later, he heard shouts of frustration as they discovered the cabin empty. When they emerged, Adam was waiting, the sharpshooter's rifle now in his hands. "Evening, gentlemen," he called from the shadows. "Seems you're trespassing on private property." Harris whirled, shotgun raised. "Show yourself, Daniels." "I don't think so." "But you should know I've got Jennings' rifle trained on you both. He's taking a little nap right now." Riker nervously scanned the tree line. "He's bluffing, Harris." "Am I?" Adam shifted position silently, then spoke from a different location. "I spent 6 years tracking men who didn't want to be found. You think I can't handle the two of you in the dark?" Harris was the first to break. "This ain't over, Daniels. Blackburn will have this land one way or another, maybe. But not tonight. Now drop those shotguns and start walking back to town. When you get there, tell Blackburn that the next men he sends will need to be carried home." For a moment, Adam thought Harris might try something foolish, but self-preservation won out. The two men laid their weapons on the ground and backed away slowly before turning and jogging toward town. Adam waited until they were out of sight before returning to where he had left the sharpshooter. The man was still unconscious. Adam retrieved the shotguns and returned to the cabin, securing the broken door as best he could. It had been a victory, but a temporary one. Blackburn would send more men, probably at dawn and more than 3 next time. Adam settled in for what remained of the night, praying that Josephine would find help in time. In Socorro, Josephine arrived exhausted but determined just as the first light of dawn was breaking. She made straight for the federal marshal's office, only to find it locked and dark. A neighboring shopkeeper who was setting up for the day informed her that Marshal Everett had left 3 days earlier to escort a prisoner to Santa Fe and wasn't expected back for at least a week. Desperation threatened to overwhelm her. Without the marshal, who could she turn to? The local law would likely defer to Blackburn, whose influence stretched throughout the territory. "Miss, are you all right?" The shopkeeper was watching her with concern. "I need help," Josephine said, her voice breaking. "Is there anyone with authority who might stand against Theodore Blackburn?" The man's eyebrows rose. "Blackburn? That's a powerful enemy to make." He studied her for a moment, then glanced around before continuing in a lower voice. "You might try Judge Harmon. He holds court in the building at the end of the street. He's new to the territory, appointed directly from Washington. Folks say he can't be bought." Josephine thanked him and hurried to the courthouse. She found Judge Harmon, a stern-looking man with silver hair and piercing gray eyes, already at his desk, despite the early hour. "Your Honor," she began, "my name is Josephine Owens. I've ridden all night from Pino's Altos to seek your help." The judge gestured for her to sit. "What seems to be the trouble, Miss Owens?" Josephine told her story: her father's death, the debts, the auction, Adam's intervention, and Blackburn's determination to take her land by force. As she spoke, the judge's expression grew increasingly grave. "This is a serious matter," he said when she had finished. "Blackburn's actions, if as you describe them, constitute numerous violations of territorial law." "Then you'll help," hope surged within her. "I can issue an injunction against any further action until a proper hearing can be held." He began writing on an official-looking document. "But without Marshal Everett, enforcement will be problematic." "What about a posse?" "Surely, as a federal judge, you have the authority to form a posse, yes. But to find men willing to stand against Blackburn," he shook his head, "that's another matter entirely. His influence runs deep." Josephine's hopes began to crumble. A paper injunction would mean nothing to men like Harris and Riker, and certainly not to Blackburn himself. The judge seemed to read her thoughts. "There is one possibility. Captain Reynolds of the Army Detachment at Fort Bayard owes me a favor. His men are technically not supposed to intervene in civil matters, but for a federal judge facing armed resistance to lawful orders." He trailed off meaningfully. How quickly could they reach Pino's Altos? "If I send a telegram immediately and Reynolds acts with haste, by tomorrow morning at the earliest." Tomorrow morning. Too late for Adam, who even now might be facing Blackburn's men alone. Josephine felt tears welling in her eyes. The judge's voice softened. "Miss Owens, I understand your concern for your friend, but rushing back without proper support would only endanger you both. The wisest course is to wait for the soldiers." Josephine knew he was right, but the thought of Adam fighting alone tore at her heart. "Can you at least send the injunction with a messenger today? Something official that might give Blackburn pause." The judge considered this. "I can do better. I'll appoint a temporary deputy marshal with authority to enforce the injunction until Everett returns." He studied her thoughtfully. "Someone with a vested interest in seeing justice done." "Me?" Josephine was startled. "It's not without precedent in the territories when regular law enforcement is unavailable. Your friend Daniels, he's a former Texas Ranger, you said." Josephine nodded. "Then he would understand the legalities. Together with this documentation, you might be able to hold your position until the army arrives." He handed her the completed injunction. "I'll prepare the deputy papers immediately." An hour later, Josephine rode out of Socorro with an official badge pinned to her coat and legal documents that declared both her and Adam temporary representatives of federal authority. It wasn't soldiers, but it was something, a shield of law that might give Blackburn reason to hesitate. She rode hard, taking the main trail this time for speed rather than secrecy. If she pushed her horse to its limits, she might reach the homestead by nightfall. Adam had not expected Harris and Riker to return so quickly, or with so many reinforcements. By mid-morning, he counted 8 riders approaching the cabin, with Blackburn himself leading them. 2 of the men carried torches despite the daylight, a clear indication of their intentions. He had prepared as best he could, moving provisions to a defensible position in the root cellar and creating fallback points around the property. But against 8 armed men determined to burn him out, his options were limited. As the riders drew closer, Adam made a decision. He would not die trapped in a burning building. If this was to be his last stand, he would make it in the open on his terms. He stepped out onto the porch, rifle held ready but not aimed. "That's far enough, Blackburn." The riders halted about 50 yards from the cabin. Blackburn urged his horse a few steps forward. "Where's the woman, Daniels?" "Safe. Beyond your reach." Blackburn's face darkened with anger. "This is my land now, Ranger. You're trespassing. The debt was paid in full. There's no claim on this property." The auction was complete when you interfered. The law is on my side. Is that why you've brought torches instead of papers? Adam's voice carried across the yard. Doesn't look like legal proceedings to me. Some of the men shifted uncomfortably in their saddles. They had signed on for intimidation, perhaps a beatdown, but arson and potentially murder were different matters. Blackburn sensed the hesitation. Don't be fooled by his talk. The law in Pinos Altos says this land is mine. Anyone who helps me claim what's rightfully mine is just upholding that law. And anyone who burns a man out of his home is a murderer, Adam countered. Is that what you all signed up for today? One of the riders, a young man barely out of his teens, looked particularly troubled. Mr. Blackburn, you said we was just gonna scare him off. Shut up, boy, Harris snapped. You'll do as you're told. Adam focused on the uncertain youth. What's your name? The young man started, surprised at being addressed directly. Tom, sir. Well, Tom, you should know that killing a former Texas Ranger carries a bounty. The Rangers don't forget their own, even retired ones. They'll hunt down everyone involved. Adam locked eyes with the young man. Is that something you're prepared for? Blackburn cut in before Tom could respond. Enough talk. Harris, Riker, get him. The two men spurred their horses forward, but Adam was ready. He fired a warning shot into the ground directly in front of Harris's horse, causing the animal to rear in panic, throwing its rider. Riker reined in hard, momentarily confused by his companion's fall. That moment of hesitation was all Adam needed. He leveled his rifle at Riker. Next one won't be a warning. Riker froze, clearly reassessing the situation. Harris scrambled to his feet, cursing as he retrieved his hat from the dust. The standoff might have continued indefinitely if not for the sound that suddenly reached them, hoofbeats approaching rapidly from the direction of town. All eyes turned to see a rider galloping toward them, and Adam's heart leapt when he recognized Josephine. She reined in between the two groups, breathing hard from her ride. Theodore Blackburn, she called out, her voice ringing with authority. I have here an injunction from Federal Judge Harmon prohibiting any action against this property or its rightful owners until a proper hearing can be held. She held up the official document, its seal clearly visible even at a distance. Blackburn's face contorted with rage. This is a territorial matter, not federal. Your paper means nothing here. Judge Harmon disagrees, Josephine replied calmly. As does Captain Reynolds of Fort Bayard, whose men will be arriving tomorrow to enforce the judge's orders. She reached into her coat and pinned something to her chest, a deputy marshal's badge that gleamed in the sunlight. Until then, Mr. Daniels and I have been granted temporary federal authority to defend this property. A murmur ran through Blackburn's men. Federal troops changed everything. Even Harris looked uncertain now. She's bluffing, Blackburn insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. Am I? Josephine produced another document. This telegram from Captain Reynolds confirms that a detachment of soldiers departed Fort Bayard at dawn. They'll be here by morning. It was a bluff. The telegram simply confirmed that the judge's request had been received, but Blackburn couldn't know that. The young man, Tom, was the first to break ranks. I didn't sign on to fight the army, he muttered, wheeling his horse around and trotting away. Others followed until only Blackburn, Harris, and Riker remained. Blackburn's face was a mask of hatred as he stared at Josephine. This isn't over, woman. No one defies me in my own territory. It's not your territory, Adam said, moving to stand beside Josephine. And it never will be. Now ride away while you still can. For a moment, it seemed Blackburn might order an attack despite the odds. But finally, with a curse, he yanked his horse around and galloped away, Harris and Riker following close behind. As the dust settled, Adam turned to Josephine, his expression a mixture of relief and admiration. "Deputy Marshal Owens, I presume?" Despite everything, she laughed. "Temporary Deputy Marshal, technically, Judge Harmon's idea. And the soldiers will actually be here tomorrow if all goes well, but they don't know that." Adam shook his head in wonderment. "You are remarkable, Josephine Owens." "I had a good teacher in stubbornness," she replied, her eyes shining as she looked at him. "Someone who taught me that what's right is worth fighting for." It was then, with the sun setting behind them and the immediate danger past, that Adam finally gave in to the impulse he'd been resisting since the moment he first saw her on that auction block. He stepped forward and kissed her, gently at first, then with growing passion as she responded in kind. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Adam rested his forehead against hers. "I thought I might never see you again," he admitted softly. "I made you a promise," Josephine reminded him, "and I intend to keep it." The soldiers arrived the next morning, as promised, a dozen men, led by a lieutenant who took his orders from Judge Harmon very seriously. They established a perimeter around the Owens property and delivered official papers to Blackburn warning him that any further interference would result in his arrest and transport to the territorial capital for trial. For 2 weeks, the soldiers remained, giving Adam and Josephine time to repair the damage to the cabin and begin restoring the neglected farm. They worked side by side from dawn till dusk, rebuilding fences, tending the garden, and caring for the animals that had somehow survived the chaos. In the evenings, they sat on the porch watching the sunset, talking of their pasts and, increasingly, of a possible future. Josephine learned that Adam had been drifting since leaving the Rangers, haunted by his partner's death and uncertain of his path. Adam discovered that beneath Josephine's determination lay a deep loneliness, a yearning for connection that mirrored his own. On the night before the soldiers were scheduled to depart, having received word that Blackburn had suddenly left for business in California, Adam and Josephine sat closer than usual on the porch swing, her head resting on his shoulder. "What happens now?" she asked softly. Adam was silent for a long moment. "That depends." "On what?" "On whether you'd be interested in having a partner." Josephine sat up to look at him. "A partner in this place, in life." Adam took her hand, his eyes earnest in the fading light. "I know it's fast and we've only known each other a short while. But sometimes when something feels right, you just know." "Are you asking what I think you're asking, Adam Daniels?" He smiled, a touch of nervousness showing through his usual confidence. "I'm asking if you might consider making this arrangement permanent, if you might consider becoming my wife." Josephine's heart soared, but caution tempered her joy. "Are you sure? This life, it's hard work, with little reward beyond what the land gives. And there's still the hearing to face, the legal battle with Blackburn." "I'm not afraid of hard work or legal battles." Adam's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "The only thing I'm afraid of is riding away from here from you and spending the rest of my life wondering what might have been." Josephine studied his face, the face of a man who had risked everything for a stranger simply because it was right. A man who had stood with her against impossible odds. A man who looked at her not as property to be acquired but as an equal to be cherished. "Yes," she whispered, tears of joy filling her eyes. "Yes, I'll marry you, Adam Daniels." His answering smile was like the sunrise, full of promise and hope. He gathered her in his arms, sealing their commitment with a kiss that spoke of all the tomorrows they would face together. They were married 2 weeks later in the little church in Pinos Altos, with Judge Harmon officiating and the entire town in attendance minus Blackburn and his closest associates, who remained conspicuously absent. The judge had brought news that the territorial governor had taken a personal interest in Blackburn's affairs, following complaints from several quarters, and investigations were underway into his business practices. As winter settled over the mountains, Adam and Josephine found rhythm in their shared life. The homestead began to thrive under their joint care. Adam's skills as a hunter and tracker complemented Josephine's knowledge of the land and its growing cycles. Together, they made plans for expansion: more cattle in the spring, perhaps horses to breed and train, Adam's specialty from his ranger days. When the snow melted and the first wildflowers appeared on the hillsides, they received word that the territorial court had ruled definitively in their favor. Josephine's father's debts were deemed to have been paid in full, and the auction declared invalid. The Owens homestead, now the Daniels homestead, was legally and irrevocably theirs. That night, as they celebrated their victory and the promise of spring, Josephine shared news of her own. "I visited Dr. Miller in town today," she said, a special glow illuminating her face. "We'll be needing to add a room to the cabin by fall." Adam stared at her, uncomprehending for a moment, then broke into a smile of pure joy as understanding dawned. "A baby! We're having a baby!" Josephine nodded, laughing as he swept her into his arms and spun her around the room. "Easy, I'm delicate now, remember. You delicate." Adam set her down gently, his hands lingering protectively at her waist. The woman who faced down Blackburn and his entire gang, who rode through the night to save a homestead and a stubborn ex-ranger. "I don't think delicate is a word anyone would use to describe you, Josephine Daniels." "Well, perhaps not," she conceded with a smile, "but careful might be wise, at least for a while." Adam knelt before her, placing a reverent hand on her still flat stomach. "Hello in there, little one," he whispered. "You don't know it yet, but you have the strongest, bravest mother in all the territories." "And the most honorable father," Josephine added, running her fingers through his hair. "I'll try to live up to that," he promised, looking up at her with eyes that held all the love in the world. "For both of you." The following years brought both joy and challenge to the Daniels homestead. Their son, James, named for Adam's fallen partner, was born healthy and strong in the autumn of that first year together. He grew into a curious, adventurous child with his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined spirit. The farm prospered under their care. Adam's reputation as a horse trainer spread throughout the territory, bringing clients from as far as Santa Fe and El Paso. Josephine's garden expanded into a small but profitable business supplying vegetables and preserves to the growing town of Pinos Altos. Blackburn never returned from California, having found his operations in New Mexico too scrutinized following the governor's investigations. His mine was sold to Eastern investors who, to everyone's surprise, instituted fair wages and safer working conditions. 3 years after James's birth, the family welcomed a daughter, Grace, with her mother's chestnut hair and a laugh that brought sunshine even on cloudy days. The cabin expanded room by room to accommodate their growing family, becoming the warm and welcoming home that Josephine had always dreamed of creating. On the 5th anniversary of their meeting, the day, Adam had extended his hand at the auction block, and Josephine had taken it. Changing both their lives forever, they sat on their expanded porch watching their children play in the yard as the sun set over the mountains. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't been there that day?" Josephine asked, leaning against his shoulder. "If you hadn't stopped the auction." Adam considered this, his arm tightening around her. "I try not to think about it. The idea of you with Blackburn." He shook his head. "It doesn't bear considering." "I like to think I would have found a way out eventually," Josephine mused, "but I'm infinitely grateful I didn't have to try." "So am I." Adam kissed her temple, though I should probably thank Blackburn someday. Josephine looked at him in surprise. Thank him? Whatever for? If he hadn't been so determined to acquire you and this land, I might have ridden right past Pinot's altos. Adam's eyes were soft with love as he gazed at his wife. I might never have found the home and family I didn't even know I was searching for. I think you would have found us eventually, Josephine said with certainty. Some things are just meant to be. As the children ran to them, laughing and breathless from their play, Adam could only agree. From the moment he had seen Josephine standing proud and defiant on that auction block, refusing to be sold like property, something in him had recognized its counterpart in her, a commitment to justice, a capacity for love, a willingness to fight for what was right no matter the cost. She had refused to be sold to the highest bidder, and he had offered her freedom instead of ownership. Together, they had built something priceless, a life of shared purpose, deep respect, and enduring love. As night fell over the New Mexico mountains, the Daniels family went inside their home, secure in the knowledge that the battles they had fought together had led them exactly where they were meant to be, not as possessions to be bought and sold, but as partners who had chosen each other freely, and would continue to do so every day for the rest of their lives.